Peace talks set to begin between Ukraine and Russia, Zelenskyy says. Peace talks are due to be held between Ukraine and Russia, Volodymyr Zelenskyy confirmed today, despite Vladimir Putin putting his nuclear forces on high alert. Diplomats from Kyiv and Moscow are set to meet without preconditions near the Prypyat River on the Belarusian border as Putin's invasion rumbles on for the fourth day. A military truck burns after being abandoned following fighting in Kharkiv, Ukraine credit, AP. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has agreed to peace talks credit, Reuters. Vladimir Putin has put his nuclear forces on high alert credit, EPA. President Zelenskyy's office said Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko has taken responsibility for ensuring that all planes, helicopters and missiles stationed on Belarusian territory remain on the ground during the Ukrainian delegation's travel, talks and return. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said the talks were called following a conversation between Zelenskyy and Lukashenko after it was feared Belarus was preparing its troops to join Moscow's invasion. In a televised address, he said, "Today, we were as close as ever to the entry of Belarus armed forces into the war. We have to defend our northern flank and we have to minimize the threats coming from there. So we agreed to send a delegation to the location on the Ukrainian-Belarus border and we go to there to listen to what Russia has to say." He said diplomats will meet without preliminary agreement on what the outcome of the talks can be. "We are going there to say what we think of this war and Russia's actions," Kuleba added. "I think the fact Russia wants to talk without any preconditions or any ultimatums, without any demands addressed to Ukraine, is already a victory for Ukraine." Zelenskyy had earlier refused to negotiate in Belarus, but according to Kuleba, Belarus's president told him there would be no such move as long as the planned talks go ahead. It comes after Putin put his nuclear forces on high alert just after warning the West may face the greatest consequences in history. The Russian tyrant is said to be furious he's not been able to subdue Ukraine and lashed out at NATO for its unfriendly measures he says forced him into the chilling nuclear gamble. The move means Putin has ordered the world's largest stockpile of nuclear warheads prepared for launch readiness. That raises the terrifying possibility the crisis and a miscalculation could spill over into nuclear war. In an address on state TV, Putin claimed aggressive statements by NATO leaders and economic sanctions against Moscow have forced his hand. He said not only do Western countries take unfriendly measures such as illegal sanctions but not only do Western countries take unfriendly measures. Putin said he has now ordered his military command to put Russia's deterrence forces, a reference to units which include nuclear arms, on high alert. "I order the defense minister and the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces to put the deterrence forces of the Russian army into a special mode of combat service," Putin said. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has tonight described Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a disastrous, misbegotten venture by President Putin which can lead to no good for Russia. The PM told the Ukrainian Cathedral of the Holy Family that he holds no hostility to the Russian people but there is no possible excuse for its leadership to choose to invade Ukraine. He said, "I'm going to stress that there is no hostility in my heart towards the Russian people, none whatever, quite the reverse. My heart aches for the Russian parents who are already losing their children in this vicious and appalling war, just as it aches for the civilians and the people of Ukraine. But when it comes to the Russian leadership who chose this path of violence, and I stress chose this path of violence and aggression, there can be no possible excuse. And never in all my study or memory of politics and international affairs have I seen so clear a distinction between right and wrong, between good and evil, between light and dark." Mr. Johnson said the UK will be very generous over Ukrainian refugees coming to Britain, with a system that lets people enter the country when they are in fear of persecution, to reunite with family or other purposes. Ahead of his invasion of Ukraine, Putin chillingly warned Russia is today one of the most powerful nuclear powers. "To anyone who would consider interfering from outside, if you do, you will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history," he said. In response, the U.S. rejected Putin's claims and its ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, called his move unacceptable. "It means that President Putin is continuing to escalate this war in a manner that is totally unacceptable and we have to continue to stem his actions in the strongest possible way," she said. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Putin's response was familiar and we've seen him do this time and time again. "At no point has Russia been under threat from NATO, Has Russia been under threat from Ukraine, she said. NATO Secretary General condemned what he said was Putin's dangerous rhetoric, adding his behavior was irresponsible. A burning Russian tank after it was hit by Ukrainian forces credit, SWNS. A top EU official has said the bloc will close its airspace to Russian airlines, fund arms supplies to Ukraine and ban pro-Kremlin media. Both Russia and the United States typically have land and submarine-based nuclear forces on alert and prepared for combat at all times. The battle for Ukraine is continuing to rage, but Russian forces faltering. Worrying new evidence has emerged about how much blood Putin is willing to shed. On more optimistic note, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has agreed to peace talks with Russia. On the fourth day of the invasion, hero Ukrainian troops and civilians scramble to beat off the Russian invaders. It comes after a day of fighting during which Russian troops failed to capture the capital. Shells rained down across Ukraine following the invasion as the battle for the capital, Kyiv, stretched into a fourth day. And Ukrainian forces are battling the Russian invaders on the streets of Kharkiv and remain in full control, local commanders say. As his forces encounter stiff resistance from Ukrainians defending their homeland, the Kremlin strongman must be furious about the lack of progress, a former NATO defense chief has said. Putin is furious. He thought that the whole war would be easy and everything would be done in 1 to 4 days, tweeted Riho Taras, who is also the former commander of the Estonian armed forces. He said Ukrainian intelligence believes the Russians don't have a tactical plan to deal with an enemy that is fighting back. Russian missiles also hit a nuclear waste disposal site on the outskirts of Kyiv, the Ukrainian State Nuclear Regulatory Inspectorate of Ukraine has confirmed.